Hey everybody, my name is Jim Farmer. I'm the festival director of Out on Film. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very, very excited this year to be able to present a hybrid festival. We're having films in theater and we're having films virtually as well. Our opening night film is the extraordinary Firebird, which we all adore. The film played last night in our theaters and begins streaming today, which is September 24th. And we're very, very excited today to have some very special guests. We have the director and co-writer of the film, Peeter Rebane, and we have the lead actor and co-writer as well, Tom Pryor. Thank you so much for joining us, guys.
Thanks a lot for having us.
Thank you.
We are so excited. I mean, we saw this film, I think we saw it during Berlin this year. We're like, oh man, we just adore this film. So we have just been eagerly awaiting getting this to our audience and have our audience see this. And right now, everybody seems very excited. I just want to start with you, Peter. How long have you been working on this project?
I guess over 10 years now. It's been since a friend saw the story and brought it to me to read.
So Tom, how did you two meet?
I was actually doing some work in Los Angeles in 2014, and the meeting actually was with the producer and a filmmaker, and she had read Peter's very early draft of the script of Firebird, the screenplay, and it was not even then actually called Firebird; it was called Roman.
Okay.
And I was just like, okay, this sounds like very fascinating. She was like, you'd be really right to play the main part in the film. So she actually introduced us back in London at her Christmas party. And anyway, then Peter and I got on super well for the meeting. And then he sent me the script and I was like, wow, this is something like really like extraordinary and a very unusual story in a very interesting circumstance. So that really kind of led us to shooting a teaser, which basically was shooting 3 scenes to help us raise the rest of the financing to finance such a scale of a production. And so we managed to do that. We managed to independently finance the film. And I started then making some suggestions on how the script might be improved a little more. And that went from sort of like 2 days of feedback to 2 weeks of in-depth analysis to 2 years worth of rewriting, and then restructuring the script and meeting the real Sergey in Moscow as well.
How would you say that the script or the project changed once you came aboard? And this is for either one of you.
Peter, do you want to go ahead?
Well, I mean, yeah, I didn't really like get into the start of it, but when I first came across the story, I kind of read it in my broken Russian over a weekend and literally cried and felt that I need to turn this into a film. And it was fascinating, really, or it was almost unbelievable that how could such a story have existed in the Soviet Air Force in the 1970s at the time. And I think one of the main aspects which we added when writing together was really the political, social context of the time, because Sergey's story is a memoir published in the 90s, an autobiography looking back at his life when he was a 20-year-old conscript in the army. And obviously, having grown up under the Soviet occupation, you take some things for granted, which you need to explain to the Western audiences. And I think that's probably one of the biggest changes, that we really made the setting and the context much more realistic.
Okay.
But maybe Tom can add further.
I'd say also like a little bit less, what was the word that I always use that you call it, like for like being an Estonian, not like nostalgic, but it was like, I kind of took it out of it kind of became like less actually art house and a little bit more like thriller like. There's certain kind of like scenes in the film, like particularly the kind of the sort of driving anxiety which is behind a lot of the story, like the accident sequence and like the kind of dramatic spread of things like happening is kind of quite a big change, I think, which we made as well.
Okay.
I mean, when we met the real Sergey, it was actually really about like finding where in reality the narrative became less about true life and more about fantasy. And so then it was really our job to figure out as screenwriters really quite where that line was, and then see what we also could do to extend his life and also be very true to the memory of how he lived.
Okay. I did not know that this was based on a true story. Did you, did you know this was, did you know about this story before you started working on this project?
Yep. It's basically the real Sergey, who used to be a rather successful theater and also film actor during the Soviet times and independent Russia. He wrote a memoir, an autobiography of his time as a conscript in the Soviet Air Force Base in Estonia, and we really based the core story on his portrayal of his life and his relationship with Roman. But then we made some creative choices really to give more of a life to Luisa. I think that was probably one of our biggest challenges and changes, to really see the story also from her perspective, because we could also argue that it's even the most tragic perspective of the three.
Tom, can you talk a little bit about your character Sergey and what all Sergey is going through in the course of the film, his journey?
I think like in so much as his journey, he kind of begins as this he's very interested by life and by people, but obviously in a very repressed society. You sort of see him obviously very much an observer and taking photos and sort of like kind of more of a kind of fly on the wall, a little bit kind of like wallflower-esque to begin with.
Okay.
Who's looking forward to basically staying out of trouble, staying out of like the kind of side of danger and attention, and just like getting out of the Air Force Base. But is a little lost as well. He's just going to, go back and not really know what he's going to do with his life, but he knows he doesn't want to be in the Air Force Base. But then when Roman comes, then it kind of really changes everything, and from a point of view of love, but also from a point of view of a love for life. And really it's through getting to know Roman that Sergey is sort of unlocked into living a much more expressive version of his life. And, it forces him to go and follow love, and also follows him to go and follow his dreams. And so after he experiences what Roman shows him at the theater, and, the whole world of the theater, again, something that he loved as a child, it really kind of opens him up to go and explore that, and him to go and follow his dreams. And in the end, he's just like, well, I'm going to go follow my dreams as a result of this relationship. And I think that that's really kind of like the kind of significant coming of age element of the story, actually, which is behind the significant love story as well. It really gets Sergey to a place where he actually becomes very much wearing his heart on his sleeve, and then he ends up becoming the fighter for the relationship. By the kind of middle to the end of the film, is actually he's the one saying, like, we can still be together, we can still make this happen, even when the situation seems completely useless. And then by the end of the film, there's a very interesting kind of circulation where he gets to the point where he lets go and surrenders to the situation.
Sure.
It's a pretty like kind of full scale U-turn, I guess,
Okay.
in the film. But yeah.
Great. I wanted to get Peter's take on this. Peter, how does Sergey, meaning Roman, how would you say that changes his life or the course of his life, professionally and personally?
Tough to add anything. I think,
Yeah, Tom was very comprehensive.
yeah, I think the way I've seen him always and relate to him. You know, obviously I was like very young boy when Soviet Union was still existing and when Estonia was occupied, but a lot of like kind of going into the broader context, a lot of the films about this period are kind of gray and ugly, and everyone wearing like dark clothes, and the coloring is often like bluish green, and growing up as a small boy, I remember that world as an amazingly colorful, fun, and vivid world. Because when you're in those circumstances, you really don't know what else is out there, and you're making the best of your life in it. So we always looked at it that this is an kind of young countryside boy coming to this Air Force base and seeing this with all of this sleek jets and fighter pilots in this world. So meeting Roman, who is much more experienced, older, kind of seen the world, a fighter pilot, it really triggers, and as Tom said, opens him up to new possibilities and gets him to see that he can really do anything that he wants to do, and he can go to the drama school and become an actor, and he doesn't need to return to the farm. So it's really, I think this opening up is probably the best word.
Another question for Peter or Tom, can you talk a little bit about this time period? Because obviously this was not a time period that was very open to same-sex relationships. Can you just sort of talk about the era?
I think there was not even such discussion or knowledge in society. There was no language or terms, and in general it was seen as a mental illness, punishable, which is kind of interesting that you punish people who are mentally ill by sending them to 5 years into a hard labor camp in Siberia. But the KGB did not use it like they used it in a way to blackmail people. It wasn't like they would try to catch homosexuals, as it was called, as the people were called at the time, and then put them to prison. It was more like they were gathering information, and if they found out about somebody, especially in the army, most likely they would have used it to turn them into a very loyal informant, knowing that at any point, if they don't obey, they can be sent to prison for 5 years. And I think that was kind of the biggest threat. Now, if you look at it from Luisa's and family perspective,
sure.
Having and I trust this Q&A is after the film, so we can talk about the plot. Having a husband who is publicly outed as gay would be so shameful that she would probably lose her job, she would lose her relationships, her relatives would disown her. I mean, she'd be marginalized, and really nobody would probably remarry her either. She'd be seen as a kind of damaged wife, really. So it would have had quite horrific repercussions if the relationship was made public.
Okay. This is a question for both of you, but this takes place during the Cold War, but have attitudes changed dramatically since that time?
I'd say that there's been certainly a significant change, but then a kind of change not necessarily for the better. I mean, if you look at kind of what's happening now in Russia and in even some other countries in the world, specifically in Europe, I mean, not necessarily even going to Africa or anything, but right now there is basically a law which was enacted, which basically just means that the promotion of homosexuality is effectively a criminal offense. And like the thing that's kind of unfortunate about that is actually it's a very interpretive law. Whereas like the time during, the time the film is set, it was sort of like it's illegal and that's the end of that. And if you had 5 years in a hard labor camp, the reality was that you weren't necessarily very likely to come back. It certainly was sort of no kind of experience that people would survive very lightly. So it's, I mean, there's an interesting circumstance which is happening right now, like in Russia, where there's the same-sex family, two guys who have two sons, and one of them had an appendicitis, and so they go to the hospital, and the surgery, and the child is fine, but the actual staff in the hospital report the family to the police, informing them of this type of a relationship. And then when the family gets home, the police actually come, knock down the door, and take the children away. So that's kind of like the reality of what some people are living with right now in Russia. So whether I'd say it's different. I'd say that it's a kind of very different version of what is the reality that Sergey and Roman had, for example. Okay. And that, in that regard as well, that, as Peter said, there was no language to be able to scale this kind of a situation back in Russia and Soviet Union anyway. There was no way in which you could say, like, is this kind of a preference of yours, or how do you like to do it? Like, and that was actually some of like the sort of most challenging but also fun aspects of how you get across such a relationship actually in a world where the language doesn't exist. And then it becomes much more about how do two people feel about each other. And that's really what we tried to do with the film, was to have it much more in this place of kind of like sort of souls coming together, rather than anything specific about it having to be like men. Like at the end of the day, like love is love. So
okay. The last year has obviously been a difficult one with COVID and lots of virtual events. What was it like to be able to attend a festival for the first time and see this on the big screen and see it with an audience?
Amazing. I think that's the one word, and humbling, and it's very emotional, because the first time was at Frameline in June. Yes. In the historic Castro Theatre, and it was kind of unexpected, because we went on stage and tried to start speaking, but the audience was standing up for a couple of minutes and applauding. And at one point I was thinking, like, okay, like, what's wrong? Like, why are they applauding? Which is amazing. And you also like really see the film through different feelings and different eyes, and the reactions which audience had. Some of them are what you expected, and some of them are a total surprise, which is really fun. Sure.
Yeah, it was honestly extraordinary we didn't even necessarily know where people were going to react in the film, because we'd sat through watching this film like God knows how many times, like Peter and I and like some of our creative team in cinemas in Estonia, just literally like 5 of us or something, when we were sort of testing it and sort of getting it to the end result. And pretty much the whole time that we had been doing reviews and screenings, which was for the best part of like over a year during our post-production period, having sat through a lot of the post-production as well, I had honestly no idea how, even when the performance came out, because you just walk out of the screen and then people are like, yeah, the coloring's like, a bit off and we need to change these scenes, or this scene doesn't work in this order anymore. And I was just like, how's the acting? You know what I mean? And so like it was, I mean, like because I mean the acting is so much more than what I do in this film. But it's like it was so interesting to go like I have no idea actually how it's going to come across, or like if people are going to like it, or if it's going to be believable. So yeah, it was cool to really see like a genuine in-audience reaction.
Congratulations. All of our programmers have seen the film and love the film, but none of us have seen it on a big screen. So we're really looking forward to seeing it on the big screen and having you here, Tom, as part as well. I want to ask you, has this film screened in Russia yet?
It did screen, actually. We were invited to the Moscow International Film Festival in April, which we were really surprised about given the current situation and context, and also grateful that the festival staff were courageous actually to program this film, because there were only 2 LGBT themed titles in the whole 147 films of the festival.
Yeah.
The Russian title got cancelled before it could ever screen. And I remember reading an interview by the festival director saying he had a choice whether to cancel the film or to fire his program director. They didn't cancel our film, but they sadly silenced it by canceling all ticket sales, canceling all invitations, press invites, and playing the screening to an empty audience.
Wow. Wow. So next up is the film is, can you talk a little bit about the distribution plans for the film and where people can see it in theaters after your festival run?
We are releasing first in Estonia, where the film takes place on 4th of November. Theatrically, countrywide, I'd say probably 80% of the cinemas are opening night, which is really amazing. Then we are releasing in Germany in about 40 cinemas across the country on the 25th of November. Some other countries in Europe in November, December. Next major release is UK in the second half of January. And I think US will be February, March next year in cinemas.
Congratulations, guys. So well deserved. I noticed that you two have been traveling a lot with this film, back and forth between countries here and there. When will you get to the point you can just relax and just say, okay, I'm taking a break? When will that time come?
That's a really good question. Who knows? I mean, like it really is like a project of love, like for so long that we've been doing it, that it's really amazing to kind of like see it coming through to the point where actually now people can enjoy it. I have no idea when we're actually going to get a day off, but like
2023 maybe.
Christmas.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, I mean, once we make some money back and pay back all our investors, that'll be a day we can just sort of like sit back and relax a bit. But relax, what is that?
Exactly. Well, that will be a well-deserved day. The film is Firebird. It is Out on Film's opening night film. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Tom and Peter, for sharing this film with us. Continued good luck, and we will look forward to the theatrical release probably sometime early next year in the United States. Thank you so very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for giving this film a platform and for sharing Sergey's story.
Oh, thank you so much.
If you love the film, actually, by the way, as well, like feel free to reach out and share how it's affected you, or come across on our social medias. That's always greatly appreciated.
Great. Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.